Nice.
It kind of works out. It kind of works out. So it's November 21st, 2024. Can you believe this year is almost over, Jeff?
Um, yeah, I can. It's been a long year. This one didn't fly by.
Dude, it flew by for me, man. I guess it's all relative.
Yeah.
It just,
I mean, we've had the babies, we've had remodels, we've had lots of stuff going on this year. So I'm glad to just end this one, start over. I mean, not that it's been bad, it's just been long.
so yeah, it's not been bad, right? But with, because when you say like, oh yeah, all this stuff's been happening, and it makes it feel like it's a long year, right? We both have a lot of things going on, but it's the activity and maybe how much those activities are costing you that can make that year feel long, or it just flew by.
Before we why is my head at the top of my screen? What is happening? Hold on.
Are you really adjusting in the middle of the show?
I am, and you're gonna hate me for it, but I was like up here. I was having a slouch. Okay, that's better.
This is why it takes me 2 days to get this put up on all the platforms. Is editing with your face. I constantly have to watch the entire episode and go through and adjust where you're sitting.
Move around a lot.
Yeah.
Can't catch me.
I have not pulled up any Instagram videos for our review today. So we're just going to skip that part. We'll make it up another day. I know we've actually gotten quite a few messages about talking about some of these videos and pointing out things that don't make sense or false information or not entirely correct. So we're going to keep doing
on our part or other people's.
What's that?
Like us putting out fake news or discussing other people's?
Discussing other people's, right?
Okay.
And, a lot of times when we break down these videos, we're discussing information that they don't talk about, or, right? It's kind of like they dangle the carrot, but you never get to it. So,
yeah, for sure.
We're going to keep that going, but just not today. And the topic for today is long range ammo. What matters most, right? So I sent this to you, and there's a lot to unpack with this, right? When we're talking every purpose that you could possibly need ammo for, but specifically long range ammo. So I guess the first question is, what do you consider long range?
I mean, yeah, right. So that's a whole nother discussion. I would consider long range to be dependent upon what caliber we're talking, right? So for me, in a normal caliber that I'm going to go out and say shoot a match or just go shoot for the day or just a long range precision rifle, I would consider anything past 800 yards, 800 and beyond, I would consider long range. I don't know if that's a hot take or not, whatever. Anything that's like, say, like my 223 or my 6x47, so my smaller ammo or my smaller rounds, I'm going to consider anything beyond 500 long range.
So can I sell you on this concept?
Yeah, please do.
What if we look at long range shooting, not so much through the lens of people who know what they're doing, whether you're an advanced, a master, or you're a beginner, right? Okay. Even beginners have a knowledge base to shoot distance. They've got some training, they watch some YouTube, they've done something, right? So what if we take every rifle owner in the world, we put them together, right? Would your definition of long range change? And here's where I'm trying to take you with this is, we know what point blank range is, right? We can look on our ballistic calculator and we can give our ballistic calculator hey, how far can I shoot and hit a certain size target, right? So let's go with a 12-inch target. For hunting, for military, 12-inch, decent size kill zone. Target shooting, same thing. So 12-inch target, how far can you point and shoot and still hit that target? A 308 with a 100-yard zero, you're probably falling off somewhere in the ballpark of 215, 225. Better caliber, you're going to extend that distance a little bit. Now, you can also zero at different distances, right? So a hunter can zero at 50 and have a 200-yard zero, or 30 and zero and have a 300-yard zero. So what if we describe long-range shooting as beyond the distance where you have to physically make adjustments and understand what you're dialing or holding to correct for gravity and drag?
I don't think that's a bad concept. I think anything beyond, I think saying that long range shooting is anything beyond maximum point blank range is maybe not a bad concept. I think that's going to still kind of vary for rifle, right?
It will, but I think we could. But
I think that's as a generality. Yeah, I think that's a pretty good concept.
So whether you have a 223, a 308, you're zeroed at 100, you're zeroed at 300. Ideally, anything beyond 350 yards, there's some type of mental capacity that's needed to further those shots.
Yeah.
So can we agree beyond 350, you're starting to get into that long range area?
Okay. I'll say I will concede and say that's fair.
Okay. I mean, because we could say, hey, long range is fucking 800, right? To us, 800 is fucking, okay, let me dial my dope, let me make my wind call, let me take my shot.
Yeah, and that's why, like,
but the other people,
it's every person, every rifle, everything's gonna be different. I could say, like, long range is anything that's going to take me right up to where my ammo goes transonic, right? Like anything where now I have to start playing some serious games or whatever. But yeah, I think anything beyond max point blank range is a good concept to go with.
I like it. Sounds right to me, right?
Yeah.
Now, as we move on, what I do want to talk about and want to put out there for everybody listening is if you're on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, if you're on any of these platforms, we now have at the top of the description of the episode the ability to text us messages.
Yes.
Shoot us a message. We've had multiple messages to include somebody called you the GOAT, Jeff, and they love you. Somebody's in love with you.
I don't know who, but God bless them.
Shoot us a message if there's anything you wanted to add or you had a question. Like, we want to hear about it. So hit that button, drop us a line, and we'll bring it up on the next episode.
Yeah, even if it's to say, look, Jeff doesn't know what he's talking about. He's just riding Tyler's coattails. Send it. I'm fine.
You know what's crazy is we're going to talk about long-range ammo right now. We're going to get into caliber selection, bullet design, ballistic coefficient, propellants, right? And all of these things, you can never stop learning, right?
Oh,
and
for sure.
You can jump online and you can jump on here right now and you can see so many different articles, videos regarding ballistic coefficients and the shapes of the projectiles and how drag works, right? Not all of them may necessarily be right. So I think learning and educating yourself about these topics can help you better understand how your projectile acts in flight or how it acts inside the rifle. But I also believe that there's a certain area where this is what you need to know. and then everything else is extra.
Agreed. I
Right?
think there's a base for creating precision ammunition at home, and you have some core skill sets and some core things you have to do. I would consider or must do's, and anything above and beyond that is okay. Now you're kind of getting into extras. That's nice, or depending upon the level of precision you're going for, is a must for some extended stuff.
Yeah. No, I would agree. So types of ammo, we've got match grade, military surplus, hunting, and your hunting bullets, like inside your hunting bullets, you have an even wider variety. If you've got lead free.
Mm-hmm.
There's other hunting bullets that are designed to have optimal flight, but the real purpose of these projectiles is to maintain mass but expand.
Yep.
Right?
Weight retention and expansion in a perfect world is 100% of both.
Okay. Now they try to take these hunting bullets and also apply some of the precision aspect of it. And when we're talking about precision, like when you think about match grade, like just off the top of your head, and I haven't looked up the definition or what different companies do to put the word match on their projectiles, but there's things in my mind that when I hear the word match, I'm expecting that from a company. What do you got? What are your expectations for a match round?
So it depends on if we're talking loaded ammunition or projectiles.
Let's just stick with projectile.
So if we're talking projectiles and we're talking match grade, I've always stated I'll never shoot a match bullet at an animal. Typically, and again, that's just my like old school thinking. But this comes from match grade projectiles are going to have a higher QC. They're going to be, I wouldn't even say like a higher BC or maybe it's always going to be not necessarily the construction, but it's going to be the quality control in production is what I think of and hear when I see match grade.
I would agree. I think quality control is a big one. But when you're thinking about Berger, Lapua, or Hornady, right? These guys are pumping out thousands, hundreds of thousands of projectiles a day.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
There's not enough time to check every bullet.
No, there's not, but there's also reasons why. Here's a perfect example. So if you look at the Federal 205 or the 205M primers, right?
Yeah.
They're the exact same primer. The only difference is the M's are QC'd in a stricter tolerance.
Yeah.
So I would assume same with bullets where you have the match grade stuff is going to be QC'd more, but that would for me would assume that they have the same exact bullet in a non-match grade, so maybe that doesn't check out for projectiles.
So there's other factors, right? The QC is part of it where you got a person there and let's say every amount of projectile that comes out, every certain number, they're spot checking, right? Making sure that there's a tolerance. Everything we do has a tolerance. So when you think about
but that's also in production, right? So the production's also going to be tighter, like in that specific bullet. We're talking case wall to lead fills, concentricity of the lead inside versus the wall. That's sort of what I mean in the QC. Like the whole production is going to be tighter.
Yeah, well, your tolerance is right. So let's say you have 140 grain ELD match Hornady projectile.
Mm-hmm.
And these things are spitting out of the machine, and they grab one, you throw it on the scale, and it weighs 140.3. Is it within that prescribed tolerance. Yes. The
Yeah.
bullet has to be a half grain up or a half grain down. Okay, this one's good. 30 more later, grab another one. It's still good, right? So the weight of the projectile got to fall within those tight tolerances, which is, in my opinion, where the match grade comes from. There's a threshold for perfection. Have to
Yeah,
be
and I guess I
range.
guess I sort of misspoke when I say like the entire from production to QC, it's just a better made product.
Yeah.
What I'm getting at is it's not necessarily the design of the product or the way, like, yeah, obviously they're designing a nice bullet, right? But it's not necessarily the design that makes it match. It's the construction.
Yeah, no. So all these tolerances put into place to give you that every projectile is similar to the next one, right?
Mhm.
Now I'm just talking out of my ass right now because I have, dude, I have gone through some reloading phases where I've taken 100 rounds and I've weighed every single one of them.
I'm currently in a reloading phase right now.
And you go through these phases where you're like, this matters. And so I'd weigh every bullet. And if it wasn't exactly the same to the 10th grain, it got kicked to the side and it got used for like something else. But it didn't matter. Like, I've used those bullets and I've seen zero effect from a 10th grain difference in terms of projectile weight. So I don't.
This is where it becomes relative, right? So I still sort by bullet weight, and I'll load up groups of 20 by bullet weight or whatever, right? So I'll have a bunch of say 58 grain 6 mils for my hunting rifle that I'll sort into different ones, but we don't notice the difference. Or typically I won't notice the difference if I really went out and just grouped them all together and shot the same batch. But you get guys shooting groups out to a mile. It probably matters for those guys.
And those projectiles are most of the time some type of lathe turned projectile where there's more control in the manufacturing process.
Yeah.
So I went through the phase of like, oh, these bullets, they don't weigh the same. They're not going to shoot well. And ultimately ended up proving myself wrong. Right. And I've done that with a lot of things. The big one is you go out, you have all this loaded ammo or you have this factory ammo and you chrono it and you're looking for what's my extreme spread from I shot 10 rounds. What's the highest velocity that was recorded? What's the lowest? And then what's the standard deviation from the average velocity of those 10 rounds, right? Across the board, I think everybody can agree low single digits is where we want, right?
Yeah, anything below 10 is great.
And if you actually look at the velocity and you say, okay, what's my extreme on each end? And you plug that into your ballistic calculator, the high end, the low end, what's the difference, right? When you're shooting 1,000, does 10 feet per second make a huge difference? So I've looked at this, right? That's a 20 foot per difference spread from high to low. And it doesn't, right? We're talking maybe a tenth of a mil, maybe, probably. How about 15? How about 20 feet per second? Like, I think you need to take a look at your data and convince yourself that you're okay, because you can make yourself feel like this is going to suck.
Yeah, and that's why a lot of it isn't necessarily for results. A lot of it is to make ourselves feel better.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's really to set up behind a rifle with absolute confidence versus I didn't take that extra step, and you're just not confident behind the rifle. I mean, there's things that I used to do that are just stupid that I don't do anymore, because back then it really mattered for me to get in a mindset to like, this has to be perfect. So yeah, but if you look at the actual numbers, if you look at things that actually matter, a lot of times we spend time on things that don't matter, and maybe overlook the things that do, which is stuff that I used to do.
Oh, absolutely. Like I learned this lesson, I want to say it was 2019, working with Falcor Defense, helping them develop the new 7 action, the bolt gun. And to condense the story, they flew me up there. They said, look at our action. And it didn't take more than a couple minutes. And I broke every single one of them. And I'm like, these are not good. I don't like the bolt stop. I don't like this. I don't like that. Let's change this. I want this, right? And so they created this new product. Boom, they give it to me. Now I'm testing, revised model number 1. And there are some issues with it, which we ended up getting fixed. But I took this Model 1 rifle, which was, believe it was chambered in 6XC. So it's a 6mm, similar to like a 6 Creedmoor. I took that to a PRS match in Montana. And the ammo that I had loaded, I just threw it together, one of my normal loads. And when I chronoed it, the SD was 18, 19 feet per second.
Nice.
It was, right? And so my internal mindset was like, damn, I'm going to get my ass beat at this match. So my real purpose here is to run the action, gather as much information about how the action functions, and keep improving the product. But I have no chance of being competitive because my ammo sucks. And I was in that I need single digit muzzle velocity spread. It's a 2-day match. I ended up walking away the winner. So more times than not, right? Your ammo's just fine. It's between the ears that's
100%,
right?
Yeah.
And so the projectile matters, the velocity matters, right? But there's a threshold, and I'm all for chasing perfection, even though I know that I can get away with 15 or 20 feet per second. I still want those single digits, right? It's just a confidence booster.
Of course. Absolutely.
And you don't really see the effects until you start stretching the distance out, right? So you really need to kind of look at your data and say, how much will this affect me? There's other things I think that take place when we're talking about ammo, right? Because the projectile has a match name associated with it, because there's standards, there's tolerances that are adhered to. When you look at ammo, you're kind of looking at the same thing. How important is the weight of the case to you? Because now the weight of the case, right? When you have one case that weighs 100 grains and you have one case that weighs 120 grains, there's something different there. There's 20 grains of difference. Is that volume? And if that's volume, now you're affecting how the powder burns, how much pressure you have in that case, right? So you could see some of your velocity differences coming from just case volume.
Yeah, and that's what I was going to get into, where things that used to matter to me that don't, and things that did not used to matter that do. And to me, one of the most important things, like one of the first things I do is sort my brass by weight.
Yeah.
That is more important to me than projectile differences. Not so much that it doesn't matter, but I've seen a greater outliers with like, wow, that brass is way too heavy, or that one is. It's always on the heavy side, which increases pressure spikes.
Yeah.
And so what I'll do is I'll just take, before I load, I'll weigh and sort my brass. And what I usually end up doing is I usually end up like tossing 2 or 3 pieces and they'll just go in the trash. And for the most part, the rest of them are pretty good. But to me, case weight, because of case volume, case capacity, means more than anything.
So I'm the same way, but maybe you haven't just said what you do, or we're not the same in terms of anal or OCD-ness. But when I get, let's say, I order brass, it's Peterson brass, it comes from, whoever. I got 100 cases of 6XC Peterson brass, small primer, large primer, whatever. When I get that bag, I want to weigh every single one. But when I'm in that mindset of like, I got to weigh every case, there's a certain trust of the manufacturer that I'm like, well, they just put this brass in the bag and fucking sent it to me.
Well, exactly. So that's another reason I don't buy prepped brass. It's prepped, but even if you buy, like, let's say I'm hard up for 223 and all I can find is like nozzler match brass, right? Because you can't find Lapua, you can't find a bunch of other stuff like Starline. I don't care. It shows up and I prep it. Flash holes, primer pockets, size it, trim it, like everything to size.
That's what I was talking about, is before I even weigh the cases, I'm going to at least trim the necks so that I know every piece is the same length and I can get more detail oriented with the weight because I'm confident they're all the same length.
Yeah, and I don't know if doing the rest really matters, but when I do my case prep, I do it all at once. So since I'm there, I'm already doing primer pockets and I'm already doing flash holes, and then I trim it. So yeah, same thing. I don't wait until after all that's done. If I wasted time on 2, 3, 5 cases, whatever.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. Some of the brass, I have noticed that you can look inside and you can see that the flash hole has the kind of like the blowout from them punching it. But then some of your match brass, like when I buy Lapua brass, I'm not finding flash hole spurs inside.
That's why I can't find Lapua brass for 223.
Yeah. So like some of these things matter. I definitely pay attention to the weight of the case. I would say that when you take a bag or a box of 100 cases, you have to know what your acceptable tolerances are going to be, because you may have 100 pieces and out of that 100, 40 of them weigh the same. But if you were to say, I'll accept half a grain left or right, now 90 of them weigh the same. So you have to be realistic on your expectations as well.
Yeah, and it depends again. I think it just comes with time and knowing that every brass manufacturer is going to be different. You may get lucky with some batches. You may, you don't know what's acceptable to you until you just do it enough to go, okay, I'm okay with this. That's why I said typically I'd have 100. I'll throw away maybe 2 to 5 because I'm not buying, used Lake City or something. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I'm buying stuff that is decent. I'm not buying like Winchester bulk.
So a lot of this is all us talking about hand loading, right? But the factory ammos come a long way. I've seen some Hornady ammo, some Federal ammo that's labeled match that fucking, it gets it.
Well, we had this discussion about reloading a couple episodes ago, which is there's some rifles that I don't even load for because the Hornady match shoots so good out of it that it's pointless until I run out.
Or so if I can't let me ask you this question. When you buy factory ammo, let's say you bought 100 Hornady match grade rounds.
Then I didn't buy enough.
Are you going to weigh them?
Nope.
You don't care anymore.
No.
What
It's
is it
funny.
about hand loading versus I'm going to buy this shit and shoot it that we don't do some of the same things? You can still take that cartridge and weigh every one of them to see how consistent they are.
You can. And it's also, again, it goes back to just making you feel better, right? If I pull it out of the box and unless it goes into my ammo sleeve, if I pull it out, load it up, throw it back in something and it ends up in my bag and I got like 6 random rounds, I will not use those for anything that matters. Those will be, I'll use those to sight. I'll use those to just shoot and play around, but I will not use those if I'm going to like shoot a match or shoot a group or something. Those are off to the side because they've touched something. Maybe the bullet is not concentric anymore. Like all these weird things in my head.
Oh my God, dude. So hand loads, factory, is it a trust? Is that what it is? Like if you hand load it, you have the ability to control the details. You are the quality control. Whereas factory ammo, you're trusting that company to give you a decent product.
Yeah. And every single rifle shoots different, right? And every single rifle likes something different. So I will shoot factory ammo out of rifles that like it. There are some rifles that are the same exact caliber that just don't shoot the Hornady as well. And so I have to load for those just because it just doesn't shoot well as something else. Like it's every rifle likes to eat something different for the most part.
I don't disagree. I mean, you could still have ammo that 10 different rifles, this ammo shoots well, right? Sub minute of angle out of each one of those guns.
Yeah.
But the differences could lie in what does your velocity spread look like? Yeah. Because you're not really going to see the differences at 100.
Exactly.
It's at distance that those spreads start to take effect, right? So all 10 of these rifles could shoot amazing. But then when you get into the weeds and you're like, what is the velocity of each one? And I've seen it here with just military guns. I've seen military ammo shoot out of a gas gun, single digit standard deviation velocities. But then you put it in the very next gas gun that's identical to this one. And this guy's a 20-foot SD.
Which would make sense. And I think would actually make a lot of sense in a military rifle. Because now we're getting, and we'll talk about this, I'm sure, at some point, but now we're getting into throat erosion and the difference that seating depths makes, right? So it would make sense that something that's had so much, like so many rounds run through it in a group of rifles that it shoots great with this one, but it won't shoot in this one. And it could be it doesn't want to shoot good in the one that's a newer rifle.
Yeah. And that brings us into caliber selection and bullet design, right? In construction. And we talked about the construction a little bit. For the most part, your long range match ammo is going to be a copper jacket with a lead fill, right? Mm-hmm. And or lead core. But the design for all calibers, when we talk about long range, the design is relatively the same. You have a boat tail, you have a bearing surface, and you have like this ogive, which could be secant or tangent, but they're all the same shape, right? It's just the caliber you go with is going to dictate how long that projectile is, how much it weighs, how much weight you can get out of it. And so when we're looking at caliber, right, there is, in my opinion, why is a 308 Winchester inferior to a 6.5 Creedmoor, whereas the Winchester shooting 175 grains and the Creedmoor shooting 140 grains? Obviously, the shape takes a huge part of this, right? The ballistic coefficient and all of that. Mm-hmm. But just on the surface level, you look at it and you're like 175 grain should be better, right? It's a heavier bullet. How come it doesn't outperform the 140 grain?
Now, are we talking bullet diameter caliber or caliber of ammunition? So are we talking a .308 versus a 6.5 millimeter, or are we talking like a 6.5 Creedmoor versus a 308 Winchester?
Well, we're relatively the same case. 308 is not the parent case of 6.5 Creedmoor, but it's relatively the same. When I load up 308, it's 42 grains of Barget. Mm-hmm. And when I load up 6.5 Creedmoor, I can damn near fit the same amount in there, if not a little bit more, because I have more case to work with because of smaller bullet.
Yeah.
But the projectile itself, right, 175 grain, is not performing as well as the lighter projectile.
Yeah, and I would think that gets into well beyond my pay grade, which is the bullet's ballistic coefficient, how it's measured, and the dynamics that go into it. And to be fair, I know how it's done, but I'm not an engineer. So I would just say I just look at the numbers and kind of go from there.
No,
I just
agreed.
look at what the BC of it is, and the why I couldn't tell you. Is it larger cross section? Is it moving? Like, I don't know. Is it bullet construction and design? No idea.
So we're going to get into ballistic coefficient and some of the construction stuff, but just digging into that a little bit, I think that the ideal case size is relative to the projectile that you're putting into it. Right? Correct. When we take a 6 millimeter and let's just take a 308 Winchester case and then neck it down to 6. Mm-hmm. We're getting more velocity. We're getting better performance from that cartridge than a 308 Winchester with a 175 projectile inside of it, right? So you're limited on how fast you can push that projectile, right? Whereas if you take a 300 Win Mag or a 300 PRC, you can shove a larger, heavier projectile in that cartridge, in that case.
Yeah, I was just going to say, you can just go the other way and just give it a bigger case.
Yeah. So I think that there is nothing wrong with 308. It's a great training round. You can do a lot with it, right? It's just the trajectory, what you can get out of that projectile itself is limited, right?
So is it limited by the projectile? So I guess my question is do you think that there's a world or a case that lives where a 308 projectile can be on par accuracy wise as something in like the 6 millimeter family or 6.5?
When we're talking about accuracy and precision, I think the caliber itself doesn't play a factor, right?
That was my question.
I have the best group I've ever shot. It's 5 rounds, and this was 2013. Custom rifle that I built on my last deployment. Best grouping I've ever put down on paper. 0.15. 5 rounds. We're talking one hole. And I was so fucking nervous taking that 5th shot, thinking I was going to fuck it up. But that's the best group I've ever shot, right? And that's precision right there. Mm-hmm. But in terms of shooting distance, right, I can still have that same precision at 800. But where's the benefit lie? Well, if you use a bigger bullet in a 308 Winchester, let's say we throw a 190 grain projectile in there, you have a better ballistic coefficient, right, than a 175?
Yeah, it's just not getting where you need it to go.
It's just slow. It's just slow, right? You can only fit so much powder in there. So now that 190 grain bullet is taking up more space and you have less velocity to get you from A to B, right? Now, velocity is it's a finical subject, because the faster that projectile's moving through space, the more drag that you're creating, right? The more drag that you have. So the ballistic coefficient, right? The simplest way to discuss ballistic coefficient and like, what is it? Yeah, it's a number, and it's got all of these calculations based off of density and cross section and like all of this, right? How long is your ogive? How long is the bearing surface? But you can dig into all of that stuff and you can go down that rabbit hole on your own. We don't need to do it here, right? What's the most important part of the ballistic coefficient is understanding that it's a decimal number, right? And as long as you're using it, you don't even have to use the right fucking comparison, right? A lot of the times, the manufacturer will give you a G7 projectile, which has got a long nose, it's very low drag, it's got a boat tail on the back, and they will compare that projectile on a G1 scale, which is a flat base, kind of a blunt nose bullet.
Mm-hmm.
Either way, if you're using a G1 scale or a G7, the higher the ballistic coefficient, in layman's terms, what it means is the bullet's ability to maintain velocity.
Okay.
So when you want to get from point A to point B, you will be more effective getting there if you can keep that velocity going longer. So if we have a 308 Winchester with a G7 BC of 0.243, 175 grain bullet, and then you have a 6.5 Creedmoor and you got a BC of, I don't know, 0.28. It's got a better ballistic coefficient. It doesn't weigh as much, but its BC is higher. So that 308 is coming out of your barrel at 2650 feet per second. Your 6.5 Creedmoor is coming out the barrel at 2750 feet per second. It's going to keep that velocity longer, right? And I'm not saying like for 200 meters it's going to stay at 2750. What I'm saying is that it's not going to lose speed as fast as the 175 grain.
Yeah, I've always described it as, and again, I'm probably just going off, but I've always described the BC as that's a measurement of that projectile's ability to resist external forces, whether that's drag, wind, or gravity.
So with wind, right, a heavier projectile is going to resist some wind deflection, but weight is included in the ballistic coefficient factor.
Exactly.
So when you think about that BC and it's telling you that it can maintain velocity better than this bullet, more velocity means you're going to get from A to B faster, which means wind has less time to move that projectile or deflect it.
Exactly. Yep.
So you don't need to be a master expert in ballistic coefficients to understand the basic concepts of a better ballistic coefficient means I'm going to get from A to B faster because I'm going to lose less velocity than a lower BC. And it also means wind's going to affect me less.
Yep.
Outside of that, like if you just go on to Google or ChatGPT and you ask, explain to me the fucking ballistic coefficient of a long range projectile, it never fucking ends. And you're sitting there going down different holes. Like, what's this? What is that? Right. But you got to bring yourself back to what is relative to me and my goals. Right. And so I think it's cool information to dive into, but it's not always necessary for you. There's a certain threshold where it's like, okay, I've learned what I need to enhance my performance and everything else is extra.
Yeah. And the bullets BC is, I'd be lying if I said the bullets BC has ever been a factor in me deciding on which one to use. Because the reality is I've usually already decided what bullet I want to use before I start loading it. Now I may try a bunch of different ones, but I'm never looking side by side at what the BC is. because I think that when you get into some of the match stuff, inherently it's all going to be fairly close, and you got to find something that works for you, right? So rather than going down the weeds of like people like Sceners, people like the ELDs, people like all these, like, okay, cool. I would guess that the BC is probably close enough caliber for caliber on those to where pick one you like, load it, and if it doesn't work for you, try something else.
Yeah, I mean, if you can get them to shoot well, right, then you are already in a good spot where you can choose any one of them. For me, when I'm competing, I need to look at certain factors of, take for example, the Steel Safari competition, right? For that competition, you have to find and range every target.
Mm-hmm.
And so what are some of the errors that could happen? Well, you could misrange a target. We did it in the last team competition. We both ranged a target, and it was sitting in a weird spot where we couldn't get a bead on it, but we were hitting the bushes in front of it, which was a 30 or 40 yard difference. And it fucking sucked because my trajectory was not flat enough to compensate for the ranging error.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yep,
So
absolutely.
for these competitions, I'm looking at it and saying, okay, how big is my target? And for PRS style stuff, most of your targets are going to be 2 minutes of angle. So that gives you, in terms of elevation, if you're aiming center of the target, you have 0.3 mils or 1 MOA above above your crosshair and 0.3 or 1 MOA below. So your trajectory being as flat as possible is going to compensate for bad range, right? Or any one of those errors. Like when you think about wind coming from the left or the right is going to change your elevation depending on the distance. You're going to get that aerodynamic lift, that jump. Can your projectile's trajectory compensate for some of those errors that you may not pick up?
Mm-hmm.
So,
well, and that's one of the discussions I've had with people before, where you always hear a lot of talk of like, wow, that's a flat shooting rifle, and I want a really flat shooting rifle. And I think people don't understand. Some of the people I talk to, and it's mostly hunters, don't understand why they want a flat shooting rifle, because numbers are numbers. I don't care if I have to dial 2 or dial 4, I'm still dialing. It's not for making your hits. The flat shooting rifle is for when you miss.
Or errors that you don't compensate for, right?
Exactly.
So when I go to these competitions, I am looking at data on a ballistic calculator. Okay, I have this 105 grain Burger hybrid. Here's the BC, and I plug that in, and I'm like, this is the velocity that I get from this guy. And then I take the 110 grain A-tip from Hornady, which has got a massive fucking G7 BC.
Mm-hmm.
And I plug that in, right? And there's two things I'm looking for. I'll start looking, and the close range shit doesn't matter, right? Because at 300, 400, 500, those projectiles are going to have the same fucking dope, or they're going to be very close, right?
Yeah.
I want to go from like 600 out to 1,000, and I want to start looking at what's the difference between the elevation needed or that 105 and that 110. And how flat is that trajectory? And for my 6XC, I want to say at like a 3,000 or 4,000 density altitude, my 1,000 yard elevation is sitting at like 6.1 mils. That's pretty fucking flat when you consider 175 grain 308, 1,000 yard shot. You're going to need excess of 10 mils. That's 4 mil difference in the height of your trajectory.
Yeah, it's a loss.
So now when I'm comparing two of the same caliber, I'm still looking at what's my trajectory look like, right? And then after I've determined the elevation and is it a problem, I go and look at the wind. What is my wind number going to be for that projectile? Because if the 105s have a similar trajectory to the 110s, then there's no benefit to shooting one or the other. But if I look at the 105s and the wind number is a 6-mile-an-hour gun, but the 110s are a 7-mile-an-hour gun, that's an advantage. It takes 7 miles per hour to move a 110 bullet the same distance as a 105 with a 6-mile-an-hour, right? So that's a 1 mile per hour advantage, and I'm going to fucking take that.
Yeah, for sure.
So those are the areas that I start to look at on a ballistic table. Where's the advantage and is it worth it? And then, I mean, my decision was pretty simple. I saw so much more advantage with the higher ballistic coefficient of the 110 A-tip. That's all I use now. I've got like a stack of them at home buried in the corner. Then I'm like, these are match. Like, this is what I'm using for every competition. And then I've got random other fucking projectiles that I'm like, I could go to the range and just fuck around with this.
Now we're talking, now we're talking bullet choices, right? We're talking people choosing what bullet they want to shoot.
Yeah.
So let me ask you this. Do you have to worry about things like how it reacts on impact?
Not for target shooting, not for competition where you're hitting steel targets.
Do you have to worry about magazine length?
I don't know if yes, right? Because in a sense, and I've had this issue before where you get some of those projectiles, like the perfect example is Berger VLD, very low drag. And
yeah, they're long as shit.
They're long fucking bullets, right? But what's so long about them is you have this projectile and it's not inherently that much longer than any other bullet. They've stretched out the ogive. It's so fucking long, right? That if you were to load them to magazine length, how much jump are you going from case to lands and grooves inside the barrel?
Yeah, it's funny because, we talk about, like, for me, I mean, obviously I do more than just hunting, but like when I'm developing loads and I'm spending a lot of time developing ammo, 90% of the time it's for my hunting rifles. And one of the things I found, I didn't find it, just as soon as we had to go lead free, it was immediate that the lead free bullets are so much longer.
Yeah.
That I have 2 rifles now that are internal magazines. One's a Mauser, like a Mini X, real inner arms. It's a real small thing that I've turned into a 6x47, the 222 run mag. And what I found is I have to now shoot like the lightest bullets I can that's available in that construction, which is going to be a varmint construction, right? So they call them like they basic explode on impact kind of thing, but they're frangible, but they're made for thin-skinned animals.
Yeah.
So I can get lead free in in a million different brands, but a very specific thin-skinned, frangible or varmint style bullet is hard to find, much less in a lead free. So now I'm finding I have all these rifles that I got 2 of them that are now single shot. Yeah. I have to load them by hand because the internal magazine is just too small, or else I have to load them so short that the jump is just insane.
So there is a very awesome, it's a great video. It was done by Scott Satterley. Awesome dude, awesome shooter. He's a wealth of knowledge, and he did a video on bullet depth seating and does it matter when you are load testing, right? And essentially he's doing like a ladder test with different depths of a projectile to see what the effects are in terms of accuracy. And for a long time, the shooting community was like, I want to be 2,000ths or 3,000ths off the lands and grooves.
God, I used to be that guy.
Depending on your chamber,
Uh-huh.
the ringer that was used for your rifle, you could have an extremely long cartridge.
I used to run it all the way in, back it off 2,000, pull it out. That's my length.
So he did this test, and it come to find out like you weren't seeing a lot of accuracy drop or any at all. His best precision fire group was with like 0.8 thousandths off the Lanza group. 8 thousandths off the Lanza groups.
Yeah. So
8/10.
I actually, so when I'm building when I develop a load, and we'll probably talk about this in a second, but I do a similar test. But I find my node and I go to the center of it. So I'll find that the accuracy is horrible, and then it's great, and then it's horrible, and I don't go to right where it's great. There's some nodes, and I go right in the middle to account for a little bit of barrel wear over time, and that round will last. That load will last me forever because I don't wear barrels out really. But yeah, I've been surprised over the years of just how much most of my rifles want to see a jump.
Yeah, and that was the purpose of his video, was to kind of show that like jumping them a longer distance isn't necessarily a bad thing, right? And when you shoot factory ammo and you're printing 1/2-inch groups with factory ammo, they're seating to SAMI spec.
Yeah, which is nowhere close to match
They're fucking jumping those bullets, right? And so like, how do you explain it? So ultimately, like, I think it does matter when you look at the projectile, right? Some projectiles don't want to be jumped. And when I experienced it, it was with those Burger VLDs. They do not like jumping. So if you want to shoot those and be precise, it's single load because they ain't fitting in the mag, right?
So I have found that most of my lead-free stuff, and I don't know if it's because they're longer for weight, right? If the weight ratio in comparison to length versus lead, if it's just that, but I've noticed that everyone that I've loaded up for damn near wants to be touching the lands.
Yeah.
And I don't know if it's, like I said, I don't know if it's a length thing or whatever, but I worry about pressure spikes as I start creating a compressed load with some of these, as I have to try to get it down to fit in the magazine. So these are just, again, we're just talking about bullet selection. It really does matter what you're loading for and what you're doing.
No, I agree.
You may be limited to 1 or 2 different bullets, and that's all you can shoot.
I want to say from relative experience, the seating depth and how far your bullet is jumping from casing to barrel, the main effect, the main culprit behind will it make the jump accurately or will there be issues, has been the shape of the ogive. Is it secant or is it tangent? Is it long and slender, or does it have that slight bulge as it tapers out to the bearing surface?
Does it hit and go?
So like, I mean, some of it is you just have to test it and kind of figure out what works and what doesn't work, right? But man, again, that's just another one of those rabbit holes that you can go down when it comes to reloading. It's like, how far off the lands and groups am I going to be?
It's funny how excited I can get when I realize that I've been shooting, I think it's a 65 grain, I forget, 65 grain Barnes varmint grenade out of my 6x47 forever. And it's the only choice I had. And it's a long bullet. It's 65 grains, which is fine, but it moves at like 2,700, 2,750, something like that. But I've always wanted to shoot the 55 grain nozzler out of it because it's a phenomenal bullet, but I can't because it's not lead free. And then out of nowhere, Barnes comes out with a 53 grain Barnes varmint grenade in a 6mm, and I was just like so excited. And it shoots fucking awful out of my rifle.
Oh no! So I was going to ask you this: if, as a hunter, right? Let's look at 2 different performance aspects, okay? Because if I can hit the heart
Mhm.
You're dead.
Correct.
Okay, so if I have a projectile, right, I want to know what's more important to you if you had to go with one. If I have a projectile here and you load that up, and that thing is a fucking hammer. It's got a flat trajectory. It's printing sub quarter minute of angle at 400 yards.
Mhm.
Doing the same thing at 100. So it's near perfect at 100 to 400 trajectory range. It loses no precision. The trajectory is flat. You have a high velocity out of it, and it resists wind deflection because it has a high BC for its caliber.
Okay.
But that projectile is on the lower end of expansion and weight retention upon impact.
Okay.
Now, the other side, you have a projectile that shoots 1 MOA at 100 and 1 MOA at 400. It's got average wind deflection, right? Nothing special about it. The trajectory is not flat, but it's not a complete football arc. It's about average. But that bullet will expand, open up, and through multiple studies, retained 99% of its mass on impact. Which side are you picking?
So I guess it would all depend on what I'm hunting, right? Is it deer? Is it coyote? Is it whatever? But what I would say is having shot and injured enough animals over my lifetime, and not because of poor shot placement, but because of poor bullet construction. I would always lean on, even though shot placement is king, that's a close enough difference for me to go, I'll always choose the better performing bullet.
That's interesting. Better performing for terminal ballistics.
Correct. Because, so like, for instance, a coyote, right? I've shot coyotes that have run off, and I've center punched them, and maybe it was maybe it was a little far back, but by the time I get to them 100 yards later, they're empty.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, they're gutted. They've gutted themselves. They've ripped their own intestines out. They were dead running for 100 yards, and they were dead the moment I shot them. And it was just poor bullet construction. It just didn't knock them down. I've shot deer that I haven't recovered, that I know I made a good shot on, and that's an awful, awful feeling.
Yeah.
And even like, not bleeding heart, like, oh, the poor animal. It's like, fuck, like, I wanted to go home or whatever, right? Or like, I'm so pumped for this hunt, and I don't have something to take home or whatever it is. It's a pretty bad feeling. So I would always pick bullet construction, especially if I am hunting coyotes, right? And even if I know it's going to kill them and I'm going to be able to recover them, because I save furs, I've blown out so many hides in my younger years of shooting something, and it just explodes out the other side. And then it's a worthless hide. I can literally just throw it away. That it was kind of pointless.
Well, you have to consider the shooter in both sides of the argument, right? You can't say, well, this bullet on the right is going to maintain mass, and it's going to expand, and it's going to send shockwaves throughout this animal that's just going to liquefy the insides. And that's going to help compensate for not on target shots. You have to apply that same logic to the other side. You have this amazing bullet, and it's going to hit exactly where you put it, but you still have to factor in the situation. You may not take the best shot, right? And so I think you're right, like picking that projectile because of the terminal effects, right? And ultimately, I think what we all want is to find that happy medium where you've got the best of both, right? You know that the bullet's going to go somewhere inside of a certain accuracy bubble, but you're going to have the expansion and terminal effects that you need to put that animal down.
So this is why when we talked about I reload for hunting versus competition, because I know I'm already dealing with typically a very low BC bullet.
Yeah.
So we talked about stacking tolerances. I just put everything else into my favor to make up for maybe a little shittier bullet.
Yeah.
So if that's the case, then I'm kind of balancing it out. So maybe it just takes more work because of the bullet I have to use, or however somebody wants to do it. Right? If there's a bullet somebody just wants to use, I'm sure they can load around that bullet and make it work.
So this is all kind of led us into a popular discussion of accuracy versus precision.
Mm-hmm. Two different things.
It is two different things. And from this conversation, from where we've gone, it sounds like you need accuracy paired with terminal effects to essentially hit the hunting wickets that you want, right? You don't necessarily need precision if you have a projectile that does what it's supposed to do for a hunting scenario.
Well, we had this discussion, in my law enforcement career about why are we using match bullets as a law enforcement community? Why are we using a 168 SMK? Why are we using a match bullet that might as well be a fucking bonded bullet because it doesn't do shit when it gets there? Like, we've had this discussion for years of terminal ballistics matter more than anything.
I think that's a harder conversation to have, though.
It is, but what I'm saying is it's not. Bullet construction has mattered since the beginning of time. I just think not enough people really take a deep dive into it. And
I agree, and I got the perfect scenario for you now because you just explained hunting animals. You're going to choose a projectile that maintains weight and expands and will shock that animal, creating chaos and havoc.
Whoa, you called them animals. I called them suspects. When I'm talking
No. I'm talking about the animals, right? God damn it. So on the hunting side, you're going with projectile that's going to put that animal down, even with a shot that's only accurate but not precise.
Correct. If you think about it like with bow hunting, would you ever bow hunt with a field tip? No, they're more accurate, but it wouldn't do the job when it gets there.
So now let's transition to a law enforcement side, right? And this does not include military. Military is a completely different animal. You transition to the law enforcement side. Now what's more important, Jeff? Precision or terminal effects?
Precision.
So you can see, right, like why departments have said, we got to go with match grade bullet for 168, 175, whatever match grade they've chosen, because they're thinking from a collateral damage aspect. If we can't put that bullet, point of aim, point of impact where we want it, where's it going?
But I also think that's why there was sort of a reckoning the last maybe 10 years or so of you see departments, and maybe it's just because different stuff came out, but now you see departments not using a 168 SMK. They're not using federal. A lot of them are using the new Hornadies, and they're using these very law enforcement specific ammo because there's been enough court cases of DAs going, why are you using match grade ammo? This isn't law enforcement ammo.
I think some of it also comes back to when you choose a precision match grade projectile, the goal is to hit what you're aiming at, right?
Correct.
But the variable, the part that you can't control, where does it go after it hits?
Correct.
You get those pass-throughs, right? If you just hit soft tissue, you get that random freak projectile that hits zero bones on the way through.
Yep.
Where does it go after it passes through the body? And that's another discussion where it's like, okay, we got precision, we got what we wanted, but now we have this other problem over here, which is the bullet's not stopping.
Yeah.
And so then they started looking at what's the penetration? What's that bullet doing? Can we have the best of both worlds where we get precision and bullet retention? Sometimes I think for the distances that they're shooting, why 308?
Why did it take a million years for departments to stop shooting 40 and switch to 9mm? Because it's an act of Congress to get things done, right? I do know departments now are now shooting 6.5.
I do more, too.
But 308, because it's been a gold standard, and it has nothing to do with it's the right bullet or not. It has to do with bureaucrats and paperwork. It has to do with, okay, cool, we can switch. I need you to show me 100 departments that are using it. I need data for the last 10 years of why it works good. And I need 15 other departments data to show me that it makes sense, and I need case law and all kinds of crap. It's like, I'm just going to shoot 308. Nobody wants to sit down and do paperwork.
I know there was quite a few departments that were testing 6.5 Creedmoor. Some departments are looking at those angles of like, how hard is it going to be to transition to that cartridge?
Mm-hmm.
But there was a lot of departments legitimately concerned with not having the power, the impact energy of a 308. You'd be surprised how many departments were concerned with, will this bullet put a suspect down if he's not shot exactly in the right vital zone?
Yeah.
And so there was that discussion. Well, 308 has more power at the target. Okay.
It goes back to the 40 versus 9mm FBI stats. There's a reason why it took so long, because people just go, it's a 9mm. It's not as effective as a 40, which is not as effective as a 45, right? It's not as effective as a 50. Like, at some point, people need to look at the data, and they have now. But yeah, I mean, that's all it is. It's just, if they don't know, and honestly, most departments aren't nerds. Most department sniper teams are just, they're not.
Yeah. I mean, I looked at one point, I built a 300 blackout sniper rifle. I just wanted to see what I could get out of it, right? So you have a 300 blackout. So you have this 308 projectile. I want to say the weight was like a 125 grain projectile, something like that. But could you use that cartridge for law enforcement purposes?
Yeah, you could. Its only benefit would be if it was subsonic and it had a can on it. Other than that, it's worthless.
I mean, now you're dealing with subsonic and you've got elevation problems at 100 yards. But these are little experiments that I was like, I wonder if we had a 300 blackout bolt gun, could we push it?
Yeah. But the point is that you're willing to test this, right? And this gets us into reloading, where sometimes you need to be willing, unless you're just like, hey, my buddy gave me this recipe, it falls within safe limits, I'm just going to reload it. Cool, I'm a reloader. Versus, hey, have you thought about stepping outside the box and really like developing some loads and see what really works for your rifle? You may be shooting a sub-minute rifle, but that could be a sub-half-minute rifle if you just take a couple days. Spend some time developing a rifle. Hey, does this 300 blackout rifle works? No. Okay, cool. We'll move on.
You know what we have access to now? That when I was building this rifle was probably in the early days of Max Ordinate. So we're talking 2013, 2014. I was like, I'm going to build this 300 blackout law enforcement gun, and I'm going to see how fucking great it does. How far can I shoot out with it? How accurate can it be? How much energy does it have? Right? How much velocity am I getting?
I think it's a cool round.
Well, what we have now that we didn't have easy access to in those days, because it was still an early concept. like it was available, but not everybody had it, is a ballistic computer. Now you could get it on your goddamn phone.
But even the earlier ones, up until not that long ago, didn't have foot-pounds of energy at impact.
Yeah. And so now you can, before you ever go down the rabbit hole of, I wonder what this caliber would do on ballistic gelatin, I wonder how far I can shoot out, I wonder how accurate it will be, you can get pretty decent energy, muzzle velocity, all of that from just building a fake rifle.
Yeah.
And coming up with data before you waste time and energy building a rifle, right? Oh, we don't want to switch from 308 to 6.5 because there's not as much energy at the target. Well, let's fucking check that. Go through, build a rifle on your ballistic calculator, compare charts. You're like, at 400 yards, the 6.5 Creedmoor is 8% less in terminal energy than a 308 with less penetration, with this amount of less penetration, right? So how do you get the penetration numbers? That's where you go out to the range, shoot a fucking ballistic gelatin or, whatever, and compare the two cartridges. But you can start chopping at some of these arguments just by playing with ballistic numbers in your calculator.
So I think that brings up a point, right? Like using technology for reloading that didn't exist before. I'm still not, like, honestly, if I'm reloading something, I still go grab my physical book, I open it up, and I find out where the starting point is if it's something I haven't reloaded for before.
Yeah.
I mean, I've got every reloading manual for the last 20 years in my reloading room. I'm sure there's better ways to do it. I used the reloader program for a few years, but I just found me physically thumbing through books, and the more you do it, the more you start to recognize powders you use all the time. The more you have a favorite powder, and you're like, oh, can I use this powder for this? So I don't use a ton of technology when it comes to reloading, but I know a lot of people do.
Dude, I will compare ballistics all day long when we're talking shop, whether it's with a student, whether it's law enforcement, military, like it's just it's right there.
Yeah, no, it's awesome.
You don't even have to guess. You're just like, look, man, here's the deal, right? It's just like we talked about when I'm looking at my 2 different 6 mil bullets. Is it worth the extra cost to run the 110 grain? I don't know. Let me see. Oh, fuck yeah, it is. It gives me these advantages. I'm going with that. Like,
so we talked about bullet choices. We talked about some things that do and do not matter. We touched a little bit on case prep, but not a ton. So I do want to ask you something when it comes to case prep. Are you, because I've always full length resize every time. I don't bump the shoulders. I literally every time I just full length because I have too many rifles that I switch in between. I prep my primer holes every single time. Or my primer pockets. I prep the flash holes just the first time. After that, I'll just rush them out. And I do trim every single time. I use a little Gerard thingy, so it's pretty easy. Other than that, I don't do much. I mean, I weigh them and I sort them, but I don't need. I think I'll anneal every X amount of shots or whatever. But do you do anything extra and beyond? Like, are you turning case necks like a fucking psychopath?
Bro, you are so far beyond me because I don't do half the shit you do anymore.
I mean, I know guys that just like they'll get into case prep. I'm like, Jesus Christ, do you not have a life?
Dude, I have scaled down my reloading so far, right? Because I mean, when we're talking about just case prep, let's just start from the beginning. I'll make sure they're all the same size.
So it's not new brass. Let's say it's all ones fired out of your rifles. Now you have a bag full of brass that has primers in them. Go.
Okay, once fired, right? But when I got that bag of brass, there's only 2 things I did. I use a mandrel, and I will expand the neck from the inside, because the difference is when you squeeze the neck from the outside, what if this case is slightly thicker than this case? So now you got different neck tension. So I size the neck from the inside using a mandrel, and then I will trim and deburr before I ever shoot those virgin brasses. But that's it. I'm not touching flash holes. I'm not uniforming primer pockets. I ain't doing any of that shit. I've
You
stopped.
got me into the mandrels, so I had to order a bunch of new crap. You know, running what do you call them? Collar die, what the dies with the freaking whatever. So I'm not running the normal dies I used to. And that's a whole nother, like I said, I'm on a reloading journey now. Like that's a whole nother steps I never used to take. You know, I always worry about case prep and neck tension, but I didn't achieve my neck tension that way.
Yeah.
So that's, again, that's a whole nother thing that like, yeah, I'm beyond you in some case prep, but like I never used mandrel dies.
So
I just didn't.
the biggest change in terms of, and like, what is neck tension ultimately doing for you? I've seen the biggest change in neck tension is your velocity, right? Like Nick reloaded fucking 200 rounds for me when I wasn't there, so I'd be ready for Steel Safari. Now, fast forward to the team challenge, I reloaded my own ammo and I used the exact same load he did, but he did not mandrel the necks, and I did. I'm controlling neck tension at like 3,000ths or some type of neck tension in terms of.
I think I'm at 0.2 or something like that.
Right. So like if you got a projectile with a diameter of 0.243, my neck tension is 2.4 or 0.240.
Yeah.
So 3,000ths. Nick didn't do that. Both ammo shot great. His shot great, mine shot great. But the difference was I was about 20 feet per second slower than his neck tension. But my SD was single digits, just like pretty close to him. I think he was at 9 or 10, and my SD was in the 5 range. So I gained more consistent standard deviation. I lost velocity. But for me, that's been the biggest change is the way that I size the necks is from the inside to control tension. So if I got once fired brass, I'm going to clean them. I'm going to full length size them. I am going to bump the shoulders, but I'm going to control it, right? So I have essentially a die that I can put the casing in, and I can measure how far the back of that case protrudes, right? Mm-hmm. And so I'm bumping the shoulders 2,000ths so that it'll fit into my chamber without fighting it.
Yeah.
But I'm not full length sizing just to crush the case, because will it work? Yeah, absolutely. But have you seen the case head separations where the bottom of the case separates from the body? Yep. You see that when you're constantly working that brass, right? And
I see that in like my Wildcats where I have to work it a lot. I have a die that doesn't necessarily match my chamber. And so every time I go to full length resize it, I used to have major issues with case separation. And so that's the one rifle. I said I never do it. That's the one rifle, because it's a Wildcat, only fits that one. That's the one that I only bump the shoulder back. I don't full length resize it anymore, because it would split on round 2. I'd get 2 out of it and they'd blow up.
So I still full length size, right? I'm still bringing that body back down to its original shape for Sammy spec. But I'm not like, with those full length dies, you can push the shoulders back significantly.
Yes.
That's what I want to stay away from. Is I just want to bump the shoulders enough to give me clean feeding in the chamber, but I don't want to overwork the brass. Every time it fires, I don't want it stretching 5,000ths. and then I'm compressing at 5,000ths, and then it keeps doing this motion and to the point where you get those problems.
So explain how you do that, right? So let's say somebody's at home and they buy a set of Lee dies, and they have a decapper with a full length resizing die, and they have a bullet seeder, right? Now, you're told to just put your die in, put your brass in, you run it up till it just touches off the top, go a little bit more so it's a nice kind of almost cams over, you run it up, you size it, that's now SAMU spec. How are you sizing it? How are you setting up your dies to where it's just bumping the shoulder back, but it's not necessarily full length resizing?
So I have a case comparator gauge from Wilson Reloading. And so it's essentially like a chunk of metal that's got a case chamber in it. And then I have a depth gauge that fits over that piece of metal. So you put your case in that piece of metal, you put your measuring tool on the back of it, and it spins, right? And there's a plunger on the inside that measures depth. So essentially I put that fired case in there and I measure where it's at, because that's my chamber right there. That is my chamber. I measure where it's at. I say, okay, here's where it is. And then I put it in my die. I'll set that, full length size it, put it in the case comparator, measure. Am I at 2,000ths? Am I 2,000ths deeper than what I was when I had that fired piece? Now I'm good. My die is set, and now I can just go through the process. But I can't get that 2,000ths neck, the shoulder bump without a tool to do it.
And you will set your die, not which would be the normal, how just the normal everyday home reloader would do it, which is just touch off. You're going to be setting up almost to where it's not going to do anything, and you're going to slowly just kind of go down until you start to see it and measure it. And it could take you 6, 7, a dozen times, depending upon what type of die you have, if it has a micrometer or not, before you find 2,000ths of net bump.
100%. Yeah, and my dies for sizing, I took so when I had the dies that have the expander ball on the deprimer, I took that ball off so it's
funny. I have a dedicated decapping die, and none of my dies have a decapper in them. So
now what I do is I have a full length sizing die that has no deprimer rod.
Same.
So I will deprime them by hand, and then I will put them in the sizing die, and I'm only sizing the body, the shoulder, and the neck, but I'm not shoving anything down the center. I'm not fucking stretching the neck by fucking ramming a fucking ball through it. I'm saving all of that for my mandrel, right? So I'm trying to control these aspects of it. But that's it, right? I really just care about where my full length sizing is at so that I'm not fighting to get the ammo in the chamber. And then where is my neck tension? Can I control that to gain some precision and some consistency? As far as annealing, I only anneal every other firing. And then trimming, I don't trim maybe every 3 or 4 loadings.
So because I used to use standard dies, and I used to always just use a regular old full length sizing die with the ball swage or whatever that's in there, I always controlled neck tension by annealing every time and full length size and trimming every time.
Yeah.
That was how in my head I was like, okay, that's what I can control. And it worked relatively for the most part. It wasn't until I was like, oh, I'm doing this all wrong. I need to start over. Until you see the SD difference.
Yes, true. There's certain things you could do to see the difference in the SD and the velocity consistency. But when it comes to a lot of the other parts, right? Like, can you anneal every time? Absolutely. Can you trim every time? Yeah, you may not be trimming anything off of those cases. They may not have stretched. So you're just doing nothing. Can you deburr every time? Of course, right? You can do all of these things every single time because in your mind, you want this batch of ammo to be the same as the last batch of ammo. And I get it, right? So it's relative to an individual, but I've just grown into a person who has found things that matter to him, and that's what I do.
Yeah, and so I'll throw something else at you because for years I never really once fired, twice fired, 7 times fired, 2, 2, 3, 6, like didn't matter to me because my process and my places to set up was always just just chaos. And all my brass went into one thing, and eventually I would just reload it, and it could be they're all the same manufacturer.
Yeah.
But that's when I got into that's when I really was sorting. Like I don't know the history of all these. Some are 2 times fired, some are 3 times, some are once. So that's when I'll go through. I'll sort them all. They'll all be sorted by case, and I'll have 100 that are the same weight. And then I go through and I do the whole thing over again. Trim, anneal, primer pockets. And what I'm trying to do is, again, I'm trying to eliminate some of the things to offset some of the other stuff that I should be doing that I'm not, right? Now I don't do that anymore, but that's kind of how I grew into always prepping my cases every single time because it just became part of my process.
Yeah. I mean, in process is a big part of it, right? Like the mental side of shooting cannot be overlooked. And so whatever helps your mental ability to have confidence, do it. Right?
Here's one thing. I've never used a powder scale in my entire life. A physical scale or one of those charging scale, like one of those powder chargers. Since I started reloading, I have the very first probably iteration of the
I know what you're talking about.
I forget which powder dispenser it is, but I have the very first one. You have the same one, the green powder dispenser, and I've used that thing for probably 20 something years.
RCBS.
Yeah, I have the original first gen RCBS. Still works great. Because again, I weigh every single charge.
Yep.
Every time.
Yeah.
And some people don't do that.
The reloading side is just it's a crazy animal, right? There's so many things to do, what matters, what doesn't matter, and that's like a whole nother topic. We could go on for hours, just the reloading side. Maybe you agree, maybe I agree, maybe we don't agree. I'm like, fuck this, I don't care. Like,
I didn't start using steel to tumble my brass until like 3 years ago. I've still been using it.
Some people don't. Some people still use corn cob, like, and it's fine. It's just, like, how much time do you have? Do you have 12 hours to polish and clean your brass?
I lost my mind when I saw the condition of that brass when it was done in the tumbler, the steel media tumbler. I was like, why didn't nobody tell me about this 15, 20 years ago? This is insane.
Yeah. It definitely saves on the time, right? But the finish on corn cob and the media tumbling is still better than the steel.
I like the way it looks.
And, for a lot of people, how it looks is what's important. And that's fine, right? Personal.
It's a nice matte finish. It's got that new load, anyhow.
Hell yeah, it does. Well, hey, man, this is a long-ass episode. We need to continue this conversation on the next one. But
let's do it
posted. Huh?
So we kind of covered components. I think we'll finish up talking a little bit about components, but I think we should really talk about the reloading process for different people that are just getting into this. Like, it sounds all fine and good of like, hey, this is what we use and we do this, but some people still don't know what the hell we're talking about.
No, absolutely. And that's one of our topics coming up for the podcast, is to get into the weeds of not just how to reload, but like where to start, what to buy, right? So anyways, I got to let you get back to doing dad and business owner things.
I got to go assemble a chicken coop. So
Hell yes.
closely related.
Hell yes. Well, hey, everybody, we thank you guys for your support. We appreciate you guys listening. Remember, go to the description, see where it says send us a message, click that link, shoot us some thoughts, tell us what you thought about the episode, things that you want to hear, talk about, like we're game. Check out patreon.com/maxordinate1 for our VIP access for videos, PowerPoints, presentation classes, and early access to every one of these video podcasts. Jeff, until next time, bro. I'll catch you later.
Peace.
See ya.